that's not actually the thing that got my attention first. What got my attention was more on what they're doing on the data fabric and data layer side, and starting to establish themselves there. Whereas it traditionally, ServiceNow has sold itself as being above the fray on the data side and being in the workflow side. I think AI is forcing everybody to be a workflow vendor and an agent vendor and a data vendor. There's no getting away from these pieces.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. I think, to a certain extent, the big winner here is Salesforce, and that their strategy around acquiring MuleSoft and some of their other plays has been, I think, being validated by moves like this.
Mm-hmm.
But that said, we've talked about it. I think that there's no way to avoid, particularly if you're a major class player like a ServiceNow or a Salesforce, you pretty much have to own the data layer now, or at least attempt to make the case, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the data layer is so critical and so impactful that it's pretty hard to have a compelling AI story at that scale without addressing the data fabric as a branding kind of thing, but the data layer of some form. Now that said, I was reading through it, their Data.World acquisition notwithstanding, which I think is interesting in its own right. But I'm reading through their data fabric and data network descriptions, their workflow data and fabric, workflow data network, whatever. And what's interesting is it is not entirely clear how far they're really going. I mean, so if I compare and contrast this, and look at the Salesforce acquisition of MuleSoft. MuleSoft was an extremely well-established data integration layer, right? An iPaaS player that clearly stood to sit there and interconnect all of your data feeds and make it all work. There are a lot of companies that have various forms of the data fabric terminology in their stories, and it's a great, very evocative term, and it means almost nothing in terms of pragmatically what am I getting for it. And I'm left with that sort of scratching my head here, in that it sounds like it's a quasi integration layer. They're talking about leaving data in place as well as some ingestion components into ServiceNow, but the ingestion components aren't into, near as I can tell, into like a data lake. It's directly into the ServiceNow platform itself. And so I left here with one of these sort of weird feelings where my first blush at it, I'm reading, it's like, yeah, okay, this makes total sense. And then as it sunk in, it's like, yeah, but is there, right? What does this really in practice mean to me? And I'll compare it a little bit more recently with we're going to talk about SAP not as kindly in a little while later, but with SAP's recent announcements on their data fabric, where they're partnering with key data platforms to power that, and I feel like that maybe is a better strategy here. So I'm curious your take. Obviously, you're a data guy. I mean, did you see this as a positive or a negative here, or
I
neutral
saw
maybe?
it as necessary, but I agree that in comparison to the SAP Data Cloud, which was their basically SAP Databricks, their partnership with this, the data titan now, startup turned unicorn turned titan. I thought that was a smart move because it's a combination of go to market and data capabilities. And ServiceNow seems to be thinking that they can take on a lot of the integration and governance and cataloging of data all on their own through this data network, which is followed with a bunch of buzzwordy language like empowering businesses to ecosystems of powerful ecosystem of trusted data partnerships, all these words that sound lovely and really challenge the user to figure out what is happening here. But I think at the end of the day, this is going to be most concretely described as a set of integrations, a data catalog to handle the metadata and definitions of data that are coming into place, and then being able to support some governance and lineage going forward by being able to control more of that back end of the data. feel is what is fundamentally going on here. I agree. It would be nice to have a little bit more of a concrete idea of what is actually happening rather than simply activating, strong ecosystems.
Well, it's